So what's your theory as to why you've been able to be successful starting basically at a small company, IC, first biz ops, finance hire, all the way through CFO of a publicly traded company, right? Normally, a lot of times somebody comes in, they do great work. At some point, a more experienced person comes in and you get layered, or you go into a special projects role, or like whereas a company goes public, they want somebody that's taken a company public before. So like what other than good luck and innate ability, like what is it that you did or evolved over the course of that time that allowed you to sort of end up in the top spot in the finance function?
I mean, I think you glossed over it really quickly there on the good luck and good fortune piece. I think so much of it has to do with like timing, finding the right company, finding the right like set of leaders that are willing to invest and bet on you in some respects. So I feel like I was fortunate to have that at Figma. It was a team and it was a leader in Dylan that, felt like they wanted to support me through that journey. I was very candid on the things that I knew, things that I didn't know, and was empowered to go and figure it out. And for me, that meant asking the right questions, understanding like where my shortcomings were, surrounding myself with people that could be my personal advocate where I needed them to be, and recognizing that I have to be this constant sponge of new learning. I think that a lot of this role can be learned, and a lot of just great leadership is first principles thinking and not actually being burdened in the way in which that historical decisions have impacted your current framing. Yes, I do think that they're helpful and relevant context. But I do think, a lot of the things that we have gone through at Figma are very unique to our own circumstance. And so I think having this ability and framework, not necessarily to feel like I know the answer all the time, but I was seeking it out, allowed me to continue to grow in the role.
What are some examples of like the biggest phase shifts in terms of what you had to learn and grow in kind of each chapter that you've been at Figma?
So I joined as an individual contributor.
What's the story of joining the company?
So I started my career in investment banking, lasted about a year and a half, and got to a place where all my friends were looking at private equity, venture, that sort of thing. And I was living out in San Francisco, and I had a recruiter reach out to me about an opportunity at Dropbox. And this was like, late 2013.
That's like one of the hottest companies in 2013, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And they were like one of the only ones based in San Francisco where they saw value in people with my background. And, I was 23, 24 at the time. And after going and meeting the team and, experiencing the office, I was like, holy crap, this is really cool. The ability to experience San Francisco for me was just like a fun thing to see and do. After that experience at Dropbox, I got to see the growth of the company from a 400 person organization to about 1,700 people. And I just had this desire to do it over. So I joined NerdWallet. I got really excited. Thought the business was a really interesting one, built on the back of organic search. And, the financials were like pretty amazing to see that you could run a 35% EBITDA business without spending a whole bunch of money. And I was like, this is wild. Lasted about 6 months there for, good reason, bad reason, whatever it is. Like I found what I was actually seeking was not to do it over like I did at Dropbox, but actually to be empowered to be the person to make a decision. And that was like the kick in the pants I needed. It was the first time I really did a search of like what I was interested in. And talked to a whole bunch of my friends that I had made it, over the course of my time at Dropbox and, living in San Francisco. And they were like, you should just go early and talk to about 30 odd different companies at the Series A type scale, 25, 30-ish people. And again, still pretty early in my career. And, luck and good fortune landed me to meet the folks at Figma. Just hired a COO. They were just trying to think about how they built out the rest of the organization. They weren't even charging for it just yet. And I was like, this is perfect. Absolutely no one knows what I would do. I can just go in and just be a sponge and put my hand up to do anything. And so that's kind of how I ended up there.
Sort of what are the big step functions in growth? If sort of Dylan made many bets on you sort of continuing to level up, like if you reverse engineer where you are now, what are those sort of milestones?
So I think the first one that I faced is when our COO left about a year into me being there. There was this like gap of who is going to own a whole bunch of like the operations parts
And
of the
what were you doing
business.
before that? Like what was day-to-day responsibility?
So it was a lot on the finance and accounting side, managing our outsourced bookkeeper, putting our arms around like the initial sets of paid cohorts that we'd started monetizing, and then spending a lot of time thinking about how we were going to evolve the product from what was completely self-serve at the beginning to something that was going to have more of a sales led motion overlaid as well. So, working with the product team to help think through pricing and packaging, build out the cadence of like, how do we actually think about growing this organization? A lot of the planning elements as well. We had obviously also gone through like a fundraise, early days of me being there. So we were Series B company at the time. The COO left, it creates this void. And, there was a whole bunch of things that no one really knew how to build, but we knew it was going to be important. Things like legal and security and compliance, sales operations function. And that for me was like really fun to throw up my hand and say, hey, I'd love to go and figure it out.
You viewed it as a positive?
Oh, I got so excited. Because at that moment, Dylan was like, come report to me, go and take on the stuff and, we'll see how far you can go with it, hire the people where necessary. And so I needed to hire really good people, a lot of functions that I had no idea what great looked like. So that was like one of the first things that was really challenging for me is like, how do you go and you build muscle and, an understanding of what great looks like. And, when you hire a great legal leader, and I had to meet a whole bunch of people and ask the questions and really understand what are the problems that we're trying to solve. And it's actually kind of wild. The person we ended up hiring back in 2018, 2019 is our GC today, a guy named Brendan Mulligan. And I'm so fortunate to be working with them even today. But, I similarly felt that across like accounting, across like, partnering on the biz ops and sales ops side. And so hiring those people, making them successful, really seeking to ask the right questions to help them get the most within the organization without them feeling blocked at all. Like that, I think was like something that I needed to develop and a motion I needed to get good at. I needed to learn how to manage a number of different, how do I create alignment within our executive room around, a set of ideas that I had. I'm someone who loves to live in a spreadsheet, will live in the data. My expectation was like, look, I should just show people this and they'll get it just as well. But I, realized very quickly that building alignment is a lot more than just showing people your thought process. Like I think you have to really understand their internal motivations, think about a problem from their seat and use that to help influence. And, learning how to influence is not easy. And so much of my role today. And I think, those were two of the things, managing and learning to influence, that I think allowed me to continue to scale.
What's an example when you were sort of trying to drive to a specific direction or outcome and had to sort of influence or bring along the rest of the exec team? Like, what's the story behind it?
A lot of it we're dealing with today on, navigating a change, going from a completely seat-driven model to one that overlays consumption for our AI products. And I think, developing a shared understanding with, our full leadership team, but then also the rest of the company on it's an entirely different financial model. We have to be thoughtful on the cost structure. We have to be thoughtful on the amount of choice that we give users. We have to be thoughtful on, effectively like creating a new currency and how that actually forms and functions. And there's so many different ways to do this. And I don't think anyone has got it, down pat and is doing it, in a perfect way. We needed to go through the stages of showing people both the external analysis of like how the market is moving, the financial analysis of how this impacts our business in a whole variety of different scenarios, but then also sitting to understand the end user behavior as we're running many of these rollouts in betas. And then and we actually just GA'd our add-ons that we charged for a few weeks ago. And being open to feedback, being open to listening allows us to kind of move in lockstep, but then also feeling like we don't have to be restricted to the decisions that we made and understanding what are the two-way doors versus one-way doors. And I think if there's an appreciation from your peers on a willingness to change and a willingness to learn, I think you can make these decisions a lot more quickly.
If I were to watch you working on that problem versus a similar problem 7 years ago, what do you think is the biggest difference between how you go after that today versus back then?
Yeah, I think I would have a lot more appreciation for our end users and community than I did 7 years ago. I think Figma has taught me a lot about what it means to lean into community-led growth and marketing. It's been super important how deeply we care about our end users, and not just like our users at our top 1% type companies, but also like the the freelancer or person who's learning. Like we want to build a product and platform that everyone can continue to grow on. And I maybe would have been dismissive of that, 7, 8 years ago, saying that, hey, how does this actually show up in our P&L? How is it actually good business sense? Today, I understand how much more these decisions are intertwined with one another and how important it really is to listen to all sorts of stakeholders there. I think in addition to that, I think having being very open and willing to hear the feedback from our product team on, the complexity that we try to introduce with wanting to be very creative on the pricing side. So it's a balance, right? Like you're trying to move very quickly and create the thing that you think is the best, creates the best business outcome. And those two can be at odds at times.
When you think about the sort of your own personal growth and you think about learning all of these new things over the past 9 years. Is there a general way that you go about it? Like you are doing a new thing, whether it be, I've never hired a lawyer, or I've never done pricing and packaging, or do you have a way that you go about sort of working on net new problems and learning?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like even my way of learning today is changing, partly because of the tools that are available to us. Last week, I got my full leadership team together, and we were all kind of messing around with, one of the person who leads our BizOps team, a woman named Danielle. She had created like, an external brain for herself in Claude Code and was ingesting a whole bunch of information and context from different parts of the organization to allow herself to get to a better first draft. And so I ended up spending a lot of my weekend kind of messing around with this too. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I feel like the level of context and place I can start today is way different even than what I would have started 6 months ago. So that's been really fun and unlocking. But then if I think more holistically, I want to seek out experts and people who've done this before because very often the decisions and sets of things that we're working on are not unique. Doing the legwork to go and build your framework, if that means that you need to start in a spreadsheet, or if that means that you need to start seeking out the right set of questions internally to build the set of problems you're trying to solve, whatever it may be, then I think I learn a lot through experimentation. I feel like there's a lot of things that we can make progress on that are not always going to be one-way doors. And if you have this willingness to experiment, it'll allow you to move a lot quicker. And just understanding what are the things that are going to be challenging to back out of, and holding those as decisions that are extremely holy. And then the other ones, I think you should be a little bit more flexible on.
What's your general process when you're talking with experts or peer CFOs or sort of anything similar? How do you figure out how to translate that into what's correct for the sort of subtle context of the company you're building, right? If somebody says, oh, we came across this problem, we solved it in this way. In a lot of cases, you can't just say, oh, that's the correct thing, let's just do it here. Like, do you have a process for figuring out, like, how do you translate that into what's correct for your sort of given situation?
I think it comes down to the questions that you're answering or asking rather, and what problems you're trying to solution for. And I think you have to have a deep understanding of your business in order to make sense of that. What I do find really helpful though is, a lot of these leaders are very smart people. You can use them as thought partners as well, saying, if you're able to give a little bit more context, you might get a better back and forth. And you end up turning these relationships into these, living and breathing organisms that you almost are creating this peer group or internal board for yourself of people that you can go to and riff with. I find that, to be super helpful and valuable. I love to return the favor as well. And so I highly encourage that, and the discipline that comes with, how you actually ask the questions and how do you bring people in.
Do you think sort of the office of the CFO or role of CFO done well is a specific thing across all companies of a similar scale? Or do you think there are certain flavors of CFO or office of CFO that you can kind of cluster, take 15 great billion-dollar revenue companies, and there's actually subtleties in the way that the role of the office of the CFO?
I can only imagine that they're going to be very different depending on industry and context. If you're a highly operational business with much thinner margins, I think that you want someone who's extremely in the weeds analytical, and the operational pieces of getting that right, I imagine, are going to be very, very important to how things are framed and move forward. I think if you're at a very large organization with a whole set of bets, like maybe your CFO role is like, how do I then go and manage the bets that we've got and the risk on and risk off nature across various sets of things. If you're an early stage organization, I think you might end up leaning into a lot of the strategy pieces as well, because a lot of the blurring of roles will start to emerge. So I don't think that there's like a one size fits all CFO at all.
In terms of Figma and your role, like if you had to take out a blank sheet of paper and write up the job description for the CFO, the role that you're in, what would be in it?
I want to be a good steward of our business first and foremost. And it's obviously, we're a public company, so it's very important to be able to look our investors in the face and share with them that, we've made the right decisions that are impacting the business long term. I think it's very important that I keep that hat on in all the conversations that I'm in, so I can shed light on how this will, allow us to build a more durable business over the long term. We need to be really thoughtful around creating the guardrails of like how we actually go and execute the business. I don't want our finance team or the way in which that we do planning to constrain how quickly we can move. And so it's setting enough guardrails to allow us to move quickly, but then also like not being overly burdensome. There's a big compliance portion of that. especially now, you need to kind of hold that to very high regard. The team that we've built is extremely operational in nature and wants to win. I'm personally someone that like wants to understand the makings of everything and wants to like have our finance team feel like they also understand those guts. And so I think it's the level of operational depth that is very important in this role, and generally the intellectual curiosity. And then maybe the other area we didn't touch on is like the IR and storytelling elements. That is an area that I've had to learn how to do over time, but especially within the context of the later and later stage that we got. And I ended up spending more and more of my time there to make sure that I could protect different other parts of the business so that they didn't necessarily have to spend that time.
What is sort of share more about what that journey has been like?
It's been interesting. I think,
Particularly because I think you have a CEO and founder who's particularly good at this,
yeah,
the sort of narrative and storytelling around the
totally.
business.
He's also an extremely, extremely good product thinker and builder. And I want to make sure the vast, vast majority of his time is spent deep in the business and in product. So if there are times for us to cover for him, to be the business evangelist on his behalf, like that is the thing I want to make sure that we do time and time again. I think his time is the most valuable in the organization, and how we use it and where we use it, we have to be really, really thoughtful on. For me, that especially as the first time CFO growing into the role, and then also realizing that investors are different at different moments in the company's life cycle. Like, dealing with a venture investor is very different than dealing with a large public, mutual fund. The level of context, the level of compliance, the level of depth and detail that you're going to get into in each one of those conversations is different. And so determining what level of altitude you need to live at, being really thoughtful about what you're sharing and how you present and what information you're showcasing, especially on the public side, because anything that you say is going to come back to you. If it's not the next quarter, it's the year after.
What do you think is the difference between doing a good job, at least in the context of how you think about being a CFO, and doing a world-class job? Like, what is the gap? Not between bad and excellent, but like you're doing a good job or you're doing an extraordinary job.
It's having this like intellectual curiosity and willingness to continue to ask that second or third order question. I think if you get stuck staring at a P&L or, set of statements, and you don't have the ability to really understand the unique drivers around it, like you're not doing your job. You're being a traffic cop. You're kind of just playing good guy, bad guy for certain decisions. And that's not helpful. I think if done well, your finance organization should be this strategic arm of the company and help you understand when you should be making investment decisions that impact the long term of the business. And that's only really going to come if you have a hunger and excitement and passion for continuing to go deeper and deeper to really understand the root cause. Like my favorite meetings during the week are, we do a self-serve deep dive where we look at all funnel indicators and all kind of live and living experiments. And it gives me an opportunity to slice and dice our business in all sorts of different directions and understand if anything is trending in a direction that I don't think is favorable. What are we doing about it? How are we actioning on it? And start to be another voice in the room to really go and push this change quickly within the organization. We do a similar thing on our sales business, and then even for some of our acquired businesses, allowing us to really seek to understand what's going on within those businesses. And so it just brings me an immense amount of joy to feel like I can really understand how that's working. And then in addition to that, like I got a set of dashboards and set of things that I will refresh on my own to feel like I can bring the level of depth to a conversation where I'm very well informed and pushing people's perspectives if we're operating at the service level, kind of taking everyone that second order of depth.
How is capital allocation and risk taking different today at, let's call it, a post-ChatGPT moment today versus before? Other than like we should be taking more risk, but like you as sort of one of the co-people that's making capital allocation decisions, what's different in this environment versus 3 or 4 years ago?
A lot actually ends up changing just when you play out that idea. So we feel it from the perspective of these coding agents have made it so easy for people to go and create software. And so, even this vertical line that I thought we're near vertical line that I thought we were on when I joined the business in terms of the amount of software that was going to get created is now like, near asymptotic. For us that at Figma, that actually is like, if you actually sit and think, that's extremely time expansive for us. Now more people are going to be involved in the software creation process. Design, craft, point of view is how you actually will win in this day and age. and how we actually then go and bring those tools to our current users, but then also how do we think more expansively is going to actually define how the next kind of 5 years look, 5, 10 years look for the future of Figma. And if you are operating in that shared context, you want to make sure that you both create the constraints for the, what are the bright lines that you don't want to cross, but you also want to be in a state of keeping your foot continuously on the gas because you believe that, the opportunity has just multiplied ahead of you. So what I found ourselves doing is, relaxing some of the constraints that we previously had. We were a business that was 90+% gross margin a year ago today. And, when we reported in Q4, we'd taken our gross margin down about 5 points to 86%. And that's because we were investing in servicing our AI products because we recognize that in doing so, we widen the overall aperture of who can participate. So you have to continue to think long term, but you want to not constrain the business to make the decisions that allow you to get there. And so I think is one of the things that has changed. In addition to that, how we're thinking about organizational effectiveness and efficiency is something that continues to be top of mind for us. I mean, it's been pretty cool to see, not just within the areas that, everyone seems to be talking about, like your software engineering, your product building teams, your support and sales led parts of the organization, but even some of the operational parts of the organization can get extremely efficient through adopting some of these tools to taking out a lot of the manual toil in their day-to-day, sharpening their pencils in the frameworks and opinions that they put forth. That then gets your mind turning on, okay, well, we can really augment the output of the people that we already have. We still have bottlenecks for sure. I very much think it's important to have domain experts within the organization, but I want to take all the manual toil away. And so you should believe that long-term we can be more effective as an organization just by virtue of adopting a whole set of these tools and being willing to experiment. Today, that means that we want to make sure that we're empowering people with the right tools to go after that, and recognizing that at some future point, we're going to have to be a little bit more constrained. But it's actually pretty cool, both like how much bigger the opportunity gets and how much more effective the organization can become. And it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive in your investment strategy.
If you think about the sort of number of bets that you're going to take as a company, do you want them to go up dramatically in an environment like this? Are you willing to have more go to zero risk in each one of those bets to sort of get the one power law bet that's going to define the next chapter? Like, how do you think about bets and bet sizing,
Yep.
failure tolerance
Yep.
today versus pre-ChatGPT, if you will?
We're an organization that moves fairly quickly with a high degree of craft. So I think our bottlenecks today are not necessarily like, do we have the right ideas, but it's more so, are we building them with the right leadership and thought behind it? So I want to make sure that even if we end up in a world that's like, we've got 100, I don't know, whatever it is, you make up a number, you got a whole bunch more bets, that we're driving those with more quality and more action and more, the right amount of resourcing to allow them to be successful. I don't necessarily just want to throw spaghetti, but I want to allow those to be well-reasoned ideas, because that's where I believe the bottlenecks are. It's not actually the creation of the product, but like, are you designing with like the end user's intent as an actual problem that we're trying to solve? Have we been refined in our thinking of what we want to build? To answer your question directly, I'd love to be taking more bets. Like I think that the cost to build has gone down, and like that should allow us to do that. And we have this large active user base that we can experiment new products with, and I think that they get really excited to try these things with us. I think you have to be thoughtful around the framing of it and how you actually take those to market. Would very much like welcome a future where that continues to accelerate. It's already kind of happening. Like last year, we doubled our product portfolio, went from 4 to 8 products in a year. And we went and we built our prompt to prototype tool called Figma Make in a matter of a couple months, 2-3 months. And then we went from that like initial beta to full GA in about 5. And it's used by like, 50% of our 100K plus customers are creating in Make on a weekly basis at the end of Q4. And so it's actually been pretty cool to see how you can, through speed and velocity, build really quickly.
Do you think when you just sort of plot out the next few years that being a world-class CFO looks materially different in a post-AI world versus a pre-AI world?
I mean, I'm finding my workflow change. And so if you're not integrating and leveraging some of these tools, then yes, I do think you're probably going to be left behind. I think we're all going to have a little bit of this come to Jesus moment on like, are the things that got us here going to be the things that get us to the next place? Tooling, I think, is important. But then also, like, I think your risk tolerance, your ability to refine and move quickly, like, you still need to create the constraints, but I do think you need to allow yourself to fail and then learn from that. Some of the things that I've been building recently and kind of working with our team on, I think even some of the forecasting methodologies that we've built are breaking and can be done in much more thoughtful ways. by leveraging some of these tools that are out there. Like, if you're constraining yourself to operating in a spreadsheet and not leveraging the ability to go and build historical regressions or the ability to go and like test your models in different ways, like that I think feels very legacy. Like it's actually really interesting. I was listening to the CFO at Cloudflare speak at a conference, and he was talking about like having 3 different forecasting methodologies run at all times. You want to understand how agents would build a forecast model using all publicly available information. So that's like an outside in perspective. It's something that you can sense check with. It's like you want to then have an internal, almost analyst model using the primitives that you've rolled out, but then also like a very detailed model that, gives you all the sets of drivers that you would have exposed to. And then you use those sets of context and obviously pulling in different tools to allow you to do that to build a better outcome. So yeah, I think all roles are changing and evolving, and it's actually really fun to be part of it.
What's unique or special about working with a founder and CEO for such a long, sustained period of time? In Silicon Valley, it's very normal to be in a role for 2, maybe 3 or 4 years. People are coming and going. But one of the unique things that you've had in this last 9 years is you've had a very close relationship with Dylan over 9 years working together. What's special about that? What's great? What's beneficial about having that type of longevity in a business relationship?
Well, I mean, you just build this level of trust with with one another where you can understand the perspective that they're coming from pretty quickly. That level of trust and buy-in, affords me the luxury to go and, operate on my own and kind of have a sense for like when I need to pull them in for certain things and what are the decisions I should just go and run with. In addition to the trust, like you assume good intent, you know that they like you for the person that you are. You can put all of the, do they like me? Do they not like me aside? And you just get to this place of feeling like you're both operating from the same level of unique context and wanting to make this place the best, the best it can be. I think you understand each other's tendencies at times. You have the ability to call each other out and give the candid feedback where necessary. Yeah, those things I think, come with time, and they come with, shared context and understanding.
Having had this relationship for so long, which again, in a lot of cases is atypical, do you think it's this immensely valuable thing that most people don't get as they go 2 and 4 year sprints or chapters with different people? Like, would you evangelize it to other people that like they should have that as a part of their career, or hard to say?
I mean, I stayed at Figma for as long as I have because I feel empowered and motivated to make this company, a generational company. I get excited about the problems that we work on. I get excited about, being able to put my hand and feel involved on anything. And so, relationships is one aspect of what you can get with tenure. The other is just like sheer business context and gut and judgment and an understanding of where the bodies are buried. And you almost have just created this like mental model of like how things are likely to fit in and where to look and what actually is necessary to be successful. So that part I would, highly evangelize because for me, it makes me an effective leader. If I were to go somewhere else, I imagine the trust building, the business context and understanding like that takes time. That learned experience, I think can be the thing that differentiates leaders, in how quickly that they can have impact in an organization.
When you use the term trust, do you mean it in the sense of like you both believe in each other's competence? You sort of mentioned positive intent. Like what in this business relationship, what does trust actually mean?
Dylan's not sitting in my spreadsheets like following my math, like there's like an understanding of competence there. There's an understanding of level of depth that I'll go to and the paces I'll put my team through. And he still asks like very, very thoughtful and poignant questions, but he also understands that, we're also doing a lot of the soul searching and context building and want to be able to go and highlight these things to him proactively. There's less of a told direction of, hey, Praveer, go and do this thing. It's, hey, Praveer, like what's actually going on? Maybe like help me build some of that context too. So that I think the longer that I've sat in the seat, the more I've actually found the freedom to go and build some of my own process and way in which that I want to run our organization and pull Dylan into that versus like him kind of guiding exactly how that's structured.
What about in the context of your own org? How do you think about at which altitude are you flying? What details are you involved in? What details do you not want to be involved in at any given point in time?
I live in a lot of the details, maybe because of how long I've been at the organization and my route coming up through the organization as an individual contributor and then through our leadership team. But it's also a shared context that our full leadership team has as well. We hold ourselves all to the same level of standard to be able to like zoom in to, the 3,000-foot view and then the 30,000-foot altitude. Many of our leaders also have grown up in the organization as well. And this is kind of the first time holding, this seat at this level of importance. And so I think it's unique to our organization. In my reviews with my team, when we're reviewing a forecast as an example, like I want to understand the methodologies. More often than not, I'll ask for a spreadsheet just to form my own mental model. I won't click through every cell like I used to, but I call out the things that feel a little bit off, or at least like poke on some of the analysis there. I think you have to have a good sense of like where you're poking and like do they actually matter for the organization. And so if you have your team chasing perfection on the thing that doesn't matter, like not a good use of time. But if you're living in the details of something that's very high impact, is going to impact like the overall framework of things that you're creating, like extremely good time spent. So I think having good judgment on like how these decisions play out and knowing where to really poke and where to say it's okay comes with time.
When you zoom all the way out, how do you measure success of the sort of part of the org that you're responsible for? That's not just like the financial health of the business or the accuracy of the forecast or those type
Yeah.
of things.
I'd love for people to involve our overall organization, not just the finance team, but like corp dev and BD and business operations and accounting, and view them as like business accelerants and business problem solvers. It's not like this traffic cop or like this go and no go police. It's like these people that you actually want to bring into the room because they are going to be the people that help you solve the problem and bring the creativity. So that's like, my first order thing. If we're not getting involved in those conversations, if people don't view us as additive, something's broken. I think longer term, and I learned this a little bit through my experience at Dropbox, like I'd love to create this place where you can grow your career, but then also you're growing your network. I think like creating these moments where people can learn from one another, creating these moments where you can share context and you can build community. For me, is like extremely important in building a fantastic organization. So
How are you going about trying to do that? What is informed by the Dropbox experience? Because I think particularly in the early 2010s, a lot of the business and partnership functions at Dropbox, to your point, attracted this incredible group of people who have done all these spectacular things. And other than like hiring great people, what is required to do that?
I actually think it like comes down to hiring good people. Many of us, this was our first job, technology. Like, I was 2 years out of banking. They had this program that's where they pulled from a bunch of people from banking, venture, hedge funds, whatever it may be. And no one had really done the thing before. So I don't think it was all written that people would be able to go and find these natural places to move through thereafter. But it was hyper important to find people that were intellectually curious, that could ask the right questions, that were really, really thoughtful about building great organizations and a great business. And like that, I think that is something that I think is, part of the hiring process and then part of the experience that you create within the organization. So like we were sharing, I want, everyone within my organization to be viewed as business accelerants and people that can unblock the rest of the organization. And if I empower them to create those sets of experiences where they can learn about go to market and what it means to integrate an acquired business, or what it means to like strike a really thoughtful partnership, like I want them to learn that, because I think it will allow them to be extremely well-rounded leaders, regardless of where they go within their careers. If they continue to grow it at Figma, if they grow it elsewhere, I'm actually indifferent. I want everyone to feel like they can build these really well-rounded experiences and then be advocates to one another thereafter.
In recruiting and building your team, if I were to look at the managers that sit underneath you, so let's call them VPs or whatever term you have for them, SVPs, what's the thread that ties them all together? Like, what are you looking for in a VP of this or a VP of that? That is not just functional knowledge, that is like a prerequisite that you care the most about.
I want someone who's like an extremely first principle thinker. I don't care if you've done this thing like 8 different times over. If it's not right for our circumstance and situation, it's not right, even if it worked before. I want someone who feels like they can live in the details. And, we had that discussion earlier. And I think it's important to feel like your leader understands the work and is not a manager of managers. That is not like the culture of our organization, nor the type of people that I'm drawn to. Building community and organizations is very important to them. Willingness to think team first versus individual is important to me. Yeah, those are a few that, I think, and then I think like we test for that.
What have you noticed about developing people into executives as opposed to hiring executives? Is there a good condition for one or the other
We've definitely done both across our organization. I have a bias to want to build from and promote from within if we can.
Because of the existence proof of how
Totally.
good it can
Totally.
be.
I mean, I've seen the benefit that that shared understanding and context can build to the way that I operate. And then I've also seen that now time and time again. A lot of folks, even on my leadership team, we've elevated over the course of time. But there are moments where, if that individual isn't growing as fast as the overall organization, or, the rate of change there isn't keeping up, like you have to go and make changes. I think being able to be clear-eyed about it and act quickly, once you're starting to get the signal on it, like that I think is the challenging part. It's always going to be easier to stay the course, but then if staying the course is at odds with like, what the business needs, like that's where you really need to look hard and make a hard call. And they're not easy conversations to have.
There's lots of examples all the time of when it works to hire external leaders and have them be super successful.
I have theories. I think it's like hard to build context in the way in which companies are building today. Like we're a very remote friendly organization. We have like offices in San Francisco around the world, but it's not as easy to go and look over your shoulder and, ask someone a question as it used to be. And so if you're not intentional about how you actually go and seek to understand within an organization, and then I think like it's also challenging for someone coming outside in to really understand like how an organization ticks. Everyone is putting up a little bit of a front, through that interview process, but it's not beneficial to anyone. The more transparent that you can be.
Which is counterintuitive for a lot of people.
Totally. But like there's a good reason why people do that, right? They want to show up well, share that things are kind of working, but at least how I've internalized it, the more open that I can be about the skeletons that are living in whatever closet, the more likely it is that someone is not going to be like, hey, you pulled a fast one on me.
Right.
Like, what
Or
the
be
hell?
successful ultimately.
Totally.
Like you may at times decrease your close rate, but you're going to increase, is the person a long-term successful person in the company?
Totally agree. And I think about some of the folks that we've added to our leadership team over time. I think we've been lucky that we've hired pretty well, but like many of those interviews, we've been getting to know those leaders for some time. Like Shant, our CRO, I think I remember going back and forth with him and for like 9 months, maybe more. He had come in and we had given him like full data dumps of like parts of our Salesforce instance. And so like he had been able to really internalize and understand like what the heck was going on so that like he could be in a place to say, okay, like I better understand the organization, versus saying like I came in, I had to learn everything for that first 3 to 6 months, whatever it may be. This has happened with, other leaders that we've brought on too. So I think if you're very quick to pull the trigger and not sharing, like, and you're hiding, it's not helpful to anyone. But then it's, an organization also wants to fill those seats quickly, and you want to, sometimes it's better to have a leader than not. So it's always a balance.
What do you think is unique about your exec team relative to 10 other great exec teams at great publicly traded software businesses?
The majority of us have like 4+ year tenure working together. I don't think that happens in a lot of places. Your perspective is a lot of people end up turning out pretty quickly, or they end up with these shorter stints. And so just this like level of understanding of what each other is coming from. So many of us have gone through these life events together, and created the scar tissue around what it's been like to grow this organization. But then also on like the personal side, so many of us like got married, had kids, like have like this set of connections with one another that it's been really cool to see it come together.
Like that's pretty interesting. Everybody has been in the seat for the first time except for one person. What else is surprisingly beneficial about that?
Well, I mean, you come with like no priors, right? Like there's, you can
You can't
learn a lot.
copy and paste from.
No, and I don't think anyone's trying to do that at all. And I think there's also this like desire and understanding that we're all going to be just as in the weeds as one another are, because we understand that it's important to the organization. That ability and desire to go deep there is unique to the organization and the leaders that are around the table, because we've all kind of grown up in the organization as well.
You've shared before sort of the importance of acting like a public company before you are one. It's something that you did at Figma. Maybe you could share a little bit more about that, and like at what point should a company be trying to run like a public company, even if it isn't one?
I can say it now that we're a public company, but like when I first started to get the questions from our board, I don't think anyone really understood, at least internally, like the level of effort that would need to go into it. And so I pulled the checklist when someone asked, and I was like, yeah, we're doing these things. We'll get there. It felt like more of this exercise that we would dip into at some point, but it didn't actually feel like as urgent. I think in Candid, the moment that I started to feel the urgency was when it felt like an inevitable outcome, or like an inevitable place that we'd like to go. And I first felt that maybe in early part of 22. We go public in 25, but early part of 22 is when I felt it. It's actually when I first stepped in the CFO role. It was like the conversation I had, and I said, okay, like here are the things that we're going to start to get going on. And the first things I told Dylan, I was like, here are the people that I need to go and hire that are going to be important people that are going to drive this process forward. So it was like an IR leader, it was a controller, a tax leader, that kind of stuff. So people and process were the places I started. We then like go through that acquisition process with Adobe in the early part of, or rather, I guess it was in August of 22. And so then we're all kind of sitting there being like, okay, well, that was fun, and we hired a whole bunch of these people. Like, but how do I actually continue to have them stay motivated and keep moving? We came up with this framework and way of operating where it's like, hey, should this acquisition go forward or not? It's just a different framework for how we would go public, right? Because if you believe that acquisition was going to go through, we'd have to fold into their close process. A lot of the deal thesis was to run Figma as a standalone business, and so the business was going to sustain. So that allowed us to continue to kind of keep our foot on the gas and get going. And the deal terminates in December 23. 24 was like our first year of like really feeling like we needed to get a lot of things like in order and moving. So that's when we introduced things like mock earnings calls. That's when we really started to engage more public market investors. We went through a larger secondary at that moment in time, and we brought on folks like Fidelity and GIC, and that would end up becoming these folks that would anchor parts of our IPO. So that's like really in earnest when we got going.
And do you think that was the right time?
For us, we needed the time because there was like process that we had to build. There were
But no, going through the whole thing, do you think you did it at the appropriate time? It should
like
have been done
public?
early, becoming public ready.
Yes. Yeah. I think if we try to do it too soon, you're going to introduce undue process. We hired an internal audit leader. She joined in, I want to say it was like late 2024. It gave her enough time to like get going. But we knew also the inevitability of us actually building into the go public process. And so, had we hired her sooner, what would she really have done? And do you actually want to go and overlay a lot of the compliance frameworks and process and slow the business down potentially ahead of the need? The answer is probably not. Folks kind of look at it and they're like, it can be this thing that happened quickly, but I actually feel like we needed that year to get going. But what then it allowed us to do is like when we said go and when we engaged bankers and advisors and, lawyers and all that, we ran that part extremely efficiently. That I'm really proud of. We went from like org meeting to confidential filing in like 4 weeks. And we went from confidential filing to going public in like 3.5 months. And so like that, I think allowed us to really minimize distraction, but we only really got there because we had done some of the legwork ahead of time.
What are some of the subtle benefits that maybe people don't fully get about being a public company?
Like it's in your moment of need if things aren't working well, or
You just have many more degrees of freedom.
Yeah, let's say that you have pitched people on these annual tenders, right? For whatever reason, the company's not doing so well while you're private. You don't have the ability to do that. Total compensation, people are just sitting on a whole bunch of equity that's not valuable. I think that you're more likely to bleed talent in that model than you would be if you're a public company and have access to public equity. Even if your stock price is depressed, I think you have more degrees of freedom there. So, I'd bet on the company there to then have the ability to go attract, retain talent. And, ultimately, I think, a company is going to evolve and be better if they have good people. That potentially is the better outcome for that business. More often than not, what we hear today are from the companies that are doing extremely well. But I also wonder if like when you did a survey of the companies that aren't doing as hot, if they would have had the same answer.
So I just want to wrap up with the question, what do you want people to say about you when you're not in the room in the context of leading the finance function? What do you want them to say about you behind your back?
I want them to say that like I show up extremely prepared. I ask good questions. I'm not slowing anyone down. I'm helping bridge perspectives, that they're proud of the team that we've assembled and get to work on together.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah,
I really
thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me. This was fun.
That was great.
Yeah.